Hello YouTube, this is Boston Best 0407, and this is going to be a follow-up to my last video in which I described myself as returning to the political center. And this video is going to be what I'm going to try to do is the most detailed explanation of my thoughts on politics and my personal political philosophy. I'm going to try my best to make this a short video, but there are no guarantees, so I'm just going to try to get right into it. So I'm going to just, from the very beginning, I'm going to describe what I believe are four spheres of human existence that make up the basis of our whole existence as human beings. And while I won't claim that my four spheres are perfect, and I think you could probably add maybe a couple more, or depending on your perspective. But I think the four I'm about to describe make up human civilization and human society very well. So here we go. The four spheres of human existence, or human life, human civilization, however you want to think of it, is the social sphere, the economic sphere, the political sphere, and the cultural sphere. So, okay, so what are that? Because there could be many different interactions with each other, and we're social animals, so everything we do is essentially social anyway. But the thing is, how do we start our lives as human beings? And this is a problem. A lot of people might disagree about how it is. Some people see we start as individuals, and then everything else just comes together. But really, we're basically social animals. We're an organism, and we engage with other organisms like ourselves. That's what we do. That's how we go about our business. And this is what it means when I say they're talking about the social sphere. The social sphere refers to our base biological functions. So, what are our base biological functions? Well, before anything else, we have to reproduce. Our essential function as living organisms is to reproduce. So, the most basic aspect of our social lives is our reproduction. That is male and female, the basic social relation. The first one, the one that matters the most in many instances, is that, because that's what produces life. So it's male and female, and that's how we relate to each other initially. Then as a tribe, we relate to ourselves. We relate to ourselves as males and females, and so different males and different females relate to, and that becomes the mating process. So how we engage with each other to create the conditions for which we produce life. That's the mating process. And so it's after we've already produced, we've procreated. We have to decide. We have to think about our survival. We have to think about how we're going to feed ourselves and how we're going to feed our children. And this relates to resources. Resources are essential to survival, with the most basic one being how we provide food for ourselves. Then there's other areas, for example, how we house ourselves, and that sort of thing, how we protect ourselves from the elements, and that becomes a part of it as well. But probably the most basic one is feeding ourselves. Because if we weren't thinking about feeding ourselves most of the time, it wouldn't even matter what the elements were doing to us, because we would die. We wouldn't be feeding ourselves. We'd wither away. And this leads into the economic sphere. And from what I understand, I think the definition of economics is the managing of scarce resources. So our economic lives refer to resources, and these are kind of material, conception of ourselves as. This is a conception of ourselves as material, needing resources, that sort of thing. And so we reproduce, we feed ourselves. But then in a very simple sketch of this, in the most simplistic sketch, the hunter-gatherer society, it's very simple. But as we grow, as this tribe grows, we go out and we need more resources. The problem becomes of how we divide up those resources, how we essentially divide up the spoils. And this leads to the political sphere. Basically, how I would think of the political sphere is how you divide up the spoils, basically. And it's from here that political structures emerge in order to manage this. So 3 areas of human existence have already been established. The social sphere, the economic sphere, and the political sphere. And when we look at animals, look at social animals, they have some conception of this. They have some. Not only are they social animals, they have some conception of an economy, and of a political kind of arrangement in which they divide up. And it's very simplistic. They're animals. It's very simplistic, but it's interesting to relate this to how we relate to ourselves. And it's interesting when you see this. It's very similar to us, but in a very, very simplistic way, not the very sophisticated and conscious way we do it, but in a very simplistic manner. Now, what's interesting is that what separates us from animals is that we as human beings are able to subscribe meaning to things. We are able to make sense of and have a consciousness of all of the things that we're engaging in. We see how we engage with each other. We can make sense out of how we go about our relationships with male and female, for example. We can critique and look at the situations, everyday situations. We have a curiosity about our environment. So we can make sense out of our economy. We can make sense out of our political structures. We can make sense out of the world around us. And this leads to a common identity. And this is what leads to culture. Culture becomes that common identity, that ability to subscribe meaning to things, and this leads to many other areas, such as spiritual, religious, things like that. And this is where some people might say that there's other areas other than what I've said, but I would say that much of what we do outside of that is cultural. That is. Our culture gives us a common identity, gives us a sense of, feeling of affinity with ourselves, and if you want to understand any human tribe, any human group, looking at the culture is that. For example, if we think of our own identity, our own sense of pride in whatever it may be, whether it's ethnic pride or how we define our personal identities, sexuality, all these different things that tend to exist in our society. This gives us a common identity, and human beings need this. We thrive. We need to feel a sense of common identity. But culture gives us that common identity. And so it makes us who we are. And it's how we subscribe meaning to all those other areas of life, whereas animals don't have that. They don't really have a culture as such, because they can't really subscribe meaning to their society, their economy, their political structures. They can't really subscribe meaning to any of those things. They just sort of engage in instincts, and so it's never really a very sophisticated way. But we have a sense of sophistication to how we organize ourselves, and it's our consciousness that's allowed us to become the sophisticated creatures that we are. This sense of consciousness. Why we evolved to become the dominant species on the planet. It's our brains, and all this is related. Now, when it comes to politics, as I said, the political sphere was how you divide up the spoils, basically. But it's within this conception of politics that indicates how we run everything else. So, for example, if we're thinking about politics, it would reflect our views, our ideology, our ideas on all those other areas. So, when it comes to political ideology, there's really like two separate temperaments, conservative and liberal. And this leads to a conception of, for example, social conservatism versus social liberalism, economic conservatism versus economic liberalism. And that's my phone. That's my someone just texted me, so if you hear a little noise back there, that was that. But and then there's economic conservatism versus economic liberalism, political conservatism versus political liberalism, and cultural conservatism versus cultural liberalism. And social conservatism would be the belief that the base biological functions should conform to, the society at large should have a role in telling people how they go about their base biological functions. Whereas a social liberalism is people should have a role in deciding how they run their base biological functions. Where then economic conservatism means that the resources should be held and controlled by one group, versus a belief that the resources should be divided up evenly, or that people should have some more control over their individually how they go about their managing their resources or whatever. Then there's a political conservatism, which believes in preserving the political structures, the government, the manner of going about things. In other words, about preserving the status quo in a political setting. And that just, for example, that would mean, like, for example, constitutional conservatism would be an example of that, whereas political liberalism would be the idea of reform, of moving forward, of changing and modifying, or even of radical revolution within the existing political framework. And the last thing would be cultural conservatism versus cultural liberalism, which would mean preserving the common identity of a group, preserving the heritage of a group, the history of a group, and believing that a common identity, a common sense of values is important for a tribe, a nation, etc. And then a cultural liberalism would be the idea that none of those things really matter, and that individuals should be essentially free to do what they want and have no real sense of common identity, or that they should create the common identity for themselves in areas of sexuality or whatever the case may be. So, what is my political philosophy? Well, I said center, and what that means is that my ideas are really a blend of left and right, of conservative and liberal. And as I said, I wanted to make this video short. So I'm going to try to describe my views in the best way I possibly can before I, shut this thing off and go about my day. So I would say that I am culturally conservative, but socially liberal. And what I mean by that is I believe that people should have the right to do whatever the hell they want in terms of their in terms of their base biological function. Having sex with whoever they feel like having sex with, putting whatever they want to in their bodies, and that sort of thing. Whatever in regards to their base biological functions, they should have the right to say it. But that I believe, the culture should have a role in guiding people. And this is the difference between. This is why this is what I have a problem with when it comes to social conservatives. Because social conservatives essentially believe that the society should kind of guide you in terms of making those type of judgments. I don't really buy into that. I believe people should be left alone to do what they want. Because when people are allowed to be left alone to do what they want, they tend to naturally go along with the culture. They tend to be a part of culture. Culture gives them a sense of identity. And so when you're not forcing it upon somebody, people will go along with it. The social conservatism leads to cultural liberalism, because what happens is when people are forced to conform or forced to do something that they don't really want to do, or when it's dictated to them, they tend to resent it. So they develop the belief that I should be allowed to do whatever I want. And it leads to a kind of general nihilism. It's just a belief in nothing. And that's what cultural liberalism leads to. So I put more stock on the culture. I put less stock on how people go about putting what they put in their body, or who they have sex with, or how they go about that. Because culture dictates to people what that would be. And for example, and so, however, when it comes to politics and economics, my views become a little bit more nuanced, because it's sort of my views would be, for example, in economic affairs, my views would be somewhat balanced. I believe people who work hard for what they have should be allowed to keep what they have, and I don't believe that the resources belong to a group. People should have more room, but within that, I also believe that there's a certain responsibility you have to the whole group. So my views on economics are, I would say, relatively socialist, but that I'm not opposed to a market economy. So within that manner of thinking, and I'll detail my views a little bit more in other videos, but I'm trying to give a sketch of what I believe in, I would be kind of a blend of socialism, capitalism. It wouldn't be really. It's really a no way. It's sort of a third way between capitalism and communism, which I don't mean to sound like I'm a fascist, because fascism described itself as a third way in terms of economics, but I would lean in a direction of a kind of a blend of, I tend to be a strong believer in economic nationalism, economic loyalty to domestic industry, and I believe in protectionism. I believe in protectionism as a positive, good thing, and so I favor protective tariffs and things like that. What was the last thing? Oh yeah, political structures. Now my views on political structures, again, are a little bit complicated. But I would say that for myself personally, I tend to be a political conservative rather, in that I believe that the purpose of the government should be to maintain. And this is what I meant before when I was fooling around with right-wing politics. I didn't mean that I was one of these crazy people that you seem to see today. For example, I don't have a problem with Barack Obama. I actually kind of like Barack Obama because Barack Obama has essentially kept things the same. He's actually probably more of a conservative in the sense that he believes in preserving the status quo, in that that's what he's done. He's not a socialist. He's not a socialist at all. He's a kind of he's like a New Deal liberal basically, and he wants to preserve the New Deal, and that's conservative. I'm also a strong believer in the Constitution, in the sense that I believe we should just kind of follow the Constitution and follow tradition and precedent within our culture, and that gives us how we should go about, for example, dividing up the spoils. So I am more of a political conservative rather, in that sense. So those are my views. My views are a blend of different aspects of politics in different spheres. So in the social sphere, like I said, I am liberal. In the cultural sphere, I am conservative. In the economic sphere, I am kind of a blend of both. But I guess you might say that I'm more of a liberal in a sense, because socialism and capitalism are both forms of economic liberalism, essentially. And I'll get to that. I'll talk about this stuff more in detail at a later point. And in the political sphere, I am a conservative. In that, although I'm not opposed to reform, in that I believe the purpose of the government is to kind of keep things the same and preserve the social order, so to speak. But that's a basic sketch of my ideas. And I don't know, this video is kind of long. I don't know if YouTube will let me put the whole thing on, because I had problems with that before. But that's how I'm going to end it here. And in my next video, I'm going to describe more in detail of what I mean by what I've said. So that's it, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.